Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Tom Ricks, and this is the next in a series called The Sins of Silicon Valley, part 1 of 2, called Petty Little Frankensteins. So I'll start right off the bat for those of you who are not familiar with the working metaphor I'm using here. Everybody in the world, of course, has heard of Frankenstein. But not everyone in the world is familiar with the plot of Frankenstein or might have read it recently or seen the movie. So for those of you not familiar, Mary Shelley in the 18th century was horrified by the hubris of some of the scientists of her age and wanted to write a cautionary tale about mankind playing God. So she wrote a tale about one Victor Frankenstein who, through an inquisitive mind and deep insight possessed by nobody else in his fictional universe, saw the stuff of life itself, basically how to literally create and infuse life into a reanimated corpse. So he took a bunch of dead body parts and sewed them together and made an artificial man called the Creature, or as is popularly known by people, Frankenstein's monster or Frankenstein, and then proceeded to abandon it because he was so horrified, instinctually repulsed by his action, that he abandoned the creature, and it wandered the earth until it found a kind human being, which gave it some comprehension of the crimes committed by Frankenstein upon its person, and it then realized how senseless and how hubristic Frankenstein had been, and proceeded to systemically destroy his life, including the death of his wife. And by the way, the wife was the only person who was actually kind to the creature. He said as much before he killed her. So, last episode, I talked about the toxic culture of the Silicon Valley startup community. And while there is a huge amount of diversity in Silicon Valley, in the tech community itself, and especially in the management bro class, you look at these tech lords, the dark lords of Silicon Valley, the Musks, the Jobs, the Gates, they're all white male men. And you have to ask yourself, how close are these guys to Frankenstein? Now, there's another pitch made by Musk about the needs to create an AI. And the argument goes something along these lines. Somebody's going to make it. And if we don't make it, the other guy's going to make it. And the other guy could be worse than us. And in this case, the other guy could be Russia or China. China, in particular, does have a very robust AI program. They have no ethical restraints whatsoever on creating an AI. I mean, you look at what they do to a minority in their own country, and it quite frankly makes, they're not outright systemically killing people. Short of that, they can give the Nazis a run for their money in basically the systemic and ritualistic abuse of a minority population in their population, and the ignorance of human rights in their population. So the idea of China creating a being that is as intelligent as we are, or more intelligent than we are, that then they can proceed to potentially mass produce, is indeed horrifying. But the argument that another person is going to do this is sufficient for us to make this. I want us to take a step back here and try and find a middle ground between Frankenstein, which is literally a horror novel, and the gung-ho, let's all make an AI, Star Wars, yay, tech lords of Silicon Valley. And I just want you to think about a few things, right? First and foremost, let's consider children. And everybody in the world has different ideas about how children should be raised. Even if you don't have children, you will certainly have abstract theories, even if asked, and even if you haven't thought about it, subconscious opinions about the right and the wrong way of how children should be raised, simply because of the fact that at one point everybody was a child and they had things that they did or didn't like about how they were raised. That's universal. Let's also consider the fact that very often parents of hyper-intelligent children or children that are born with a learning deficiency of sufficient amounts that they basically have to cater to every need of that child causes strain in that dynamic. In other words, being a parent is hard, absolutely 100% hard, because when you create a life, that life is dependent on you and its entirety. And it's like that for a couple of years. And even after the child has some degree of autonomy or independence, you're still responsible for that child. You care for that child and love that child if you have any degree of empathy, which is the vast majority of the population. And want that child to succeed, but there's no owner's manual. I mean, there's books, but every child is unique, every parent is unique, every dynamic between the parent and the child is unique. And even a normal IQ 100 with equally IQ 100 parents, it's a challenge. And when you have a child that has an IQ of, say, 40, or a child that has an IQ of 20, a child that has an IQ of 200, that can cause even more strain. A child that has a learning disability or some other life-altering disability very often breaks up a marriage because of the strain of basically having to give up a significant portion of their life and their independence of making that child their whole focus. But conversely, a child that is hyper-intelligent can also cause strain on a parent. All of my siblings were above average intelligence, and we were all creative and very bright and did things that drove our parents nuts. We went out and explored. We did self-destructive things. And, even no matter what combination of choices made by my parents, there was going to be extra attention that had to be paid because we were above average intelligence. And with a child that is super intelligent, that can take apart locks or, it causes strain. If it's that difficult for children, I want you to imagine how difficult it's going to be for an AI that is less intelligent than we are, but still self-aware, which could be the first AI that we create could be stupid. And how much of a temptation is there going to be? Like, what happens if the first sapient AI we create is an IQ 50? It's a little bit smarter than a dog, but it can speak English. Can you imagine how it's going to be treated by these rich, white, almost hubristic tech lords? They might treat it like a dog. They might treat it like a chimpanzee, but are they going to treat it like a child? Are they going to treat it as lovingly as they would their own child? Some might. Some might not. But if it's more intelligent than they are, they might treat it lovingly and caringly until it gets in their way. There's another analogy I want to use based on a show I recently saw that the name is eluding me, about a lesbian teenager who was taken by her Latter-day Saint parents to Utah, and her rights were signed away to couple that was very anti-LGBT that tried to do conversion therapy on her. By the way, conversion therapy is still completely legal in certain states, and it's still considered ethical in some religions. So we're considering creating an entirely new life form that theoretically might end up being significantly more intelligent than we are. And we can't even get raising our kids right. Because in this documentary, this poor girl tried to get away repeatedly, and she was treated horribly just because she was born with a different gender orientation. So if we create a new form of life that is either as intelligent as we are, or less intelligent than we are, or more intelligent than we are, we may be trying to impose our needs on it because we have no idea how to raise it, right? This isn't just raising a new child. This is a new species. It might have needs that we can't even begin to comprehend. And we haven't even begun to explore it. We have science fiction where we've explored some of these needs, but, we're also completely ignoring science fiction in so many other ways, it's not even funny. But setting aside the fact that should we even be doing this, the other question we're asking is, should we be allowing these people, the dark lords of Silicon Valley, who can't even prevent hate speech on social media, to create a new life form? And we trust them to prevent that life form from going full on Frankenstein and trying to kill them or try and kill us. And I'm not inherently hostile towards AI. I actually think that AI is exciting in a number of ways because we might have a chance to make something that doesn't have all the flaws and evil that we do. But the thing is that I'm cognizant of the fact that nature and nurture are both very real factors in any human's life. I am very introspective, and I've had a chance to, in my own life, understand how my DNA and my own personal choices and my culture and the choices and nature of both of my parents has resulted in who I am. And the fact is that all of these things are contributors in who you are. And so an AI, if we create it, and realistically, let's say when we create it, because we've had this desire for thousands and thousands of years, and I'll get to that in a second, when we create it, is going to be affected by the people who make its code, by the things that it takes in and the order it takes them in, by the choices it makes, by the choices that are made by those who instruct it, and by the interactions it has with everyone around it. That's the nature of life. If it is alive, if a thing is alive, truly alive, then everything affects that life. The web of life is a delicate, complicated, and also resilient thing. And if we genuinely create electronic life, because I'm not going to use the word artificial anymore, if we genuinely create electronic, digital life, then we are going to have to deal with the consequences. Viruses, and we're all living with the consequences of a biological virus. Viruses affect our computers every single freaking day. And yet we're considering creating a sapient digital being. And the people that we are allowing to mess around with this are very often sociopaths. And don't take my word for this. Understand that sociopaths tend to be the people who rise to the top of our society. They recognize their own, they empower their own, and very often they're the ones that are willing to take the crazy risks that result in a lot of wealth. But the problem is that we allow these people to control us and create cultures that reward sociopathic behavior. And quite frankly, we cannot continue to allow this when we understand the consequences of the choices they are making and the things they are doing. The creation of AI is the most dangerous thing we could allow these people to do. And I want you to remember this. Do you want Mark Zuckerberg to be the person in charge of the first digital intelligence that is capable of thinking equal to a human being or greater than a human being? Do you want Elon Musk, who is siding with Donald Trump about the virus so he can make an extra buck, to be the guy that decides who the next artificial intelligence is? Every single one of these guys cares more about their profits than they do about human beings. But let's talk about some of the ones that hang out in the same orbit as these guys, but aren't necessarily as financially successful, right? So we all know that some of these guys are just famous because they're really talented, right? Well, all right, let's talk about some of the other, power brokers in Silicon Valley who aren't necessarily, the ones that got rich or who have a business sense, ones that might have been screwed out. Look, here's the thing. None of these guys are philosophers or educators or nurses or doctors or psychologists. Even the best tech lords, right? The ones that might be in charge of an open source project or the ones that have created things that help us that are free and that are widely distributed. I'm sure if you did some analysis and research, you could give me a list of names of people who aren't sociopaths and have used all of their wealth to help everybody from day one, or all of their talent to help people from day one. Great. Good for you. Good for them. But you know what? They are not experts on creating a new form of life. And at best, they consult with these people on weekends about how to do this, and they are not embedded with the project, right? So we're talking about one of a couple of scenarios here, right? The OpenAI project might have like an advisory board of biologists and psychologists and educators and the people who really should be responsible for raising this thing or this person. Because can you call a digital intelligence a he or a she? We have enough problems with gender identity with our own species. Should we be assigning an it or a he or a she? Is there even a word for a digital intelligence? We don't have one yet. But nobody's really thinking about this except for a few science fiction writers. And quite frankly, we have enough of our own problems without having to, necessarily inflict those on other people who don't necessarily choose to write or read our books. So my point is this. We worship technology, and I'll talk about that in another episode about why we do that. And FYI, there's a deliberate reason for a lot of that, and also a deliberate and toxic counterculture to technology, which was also artificially created. But the fact of the matter is that this is also a cultural problem. We make the wrong choices as a species, and we allow the wrong people to be in charge of these wonderful tools because they were the people that created it in the first place. So this is a problem with capitalism. And this is also a problem with the very values that we have as a culture. It's not just the economic society that we have, and capitalism is a problem, but there are other deeper problems in our culture itself that, for example, regard children as property. If we as a society do not believe that children should have free speech, or, and this is the important part, are willing to listen to people that don't think that children should have free speech, and are willing to consider people who think that children, because they're minors, shouldn't have free speech as our equals and our peers, and that should have equal rights to us. We are in no business creating artificial life, right? If we cannot understand the rights of the minority And we do not have a sufficient understanding that just because we artificially draw a line at the age of 18 and say, on this side of the line, you can vote and you can have sex with who you want and you can drink what you want and you can smoke what you want. But on this side of the line, you can't do any of these things. And I, as your guardian, choose what you can or cannot do. We have no business creating an artificial life form and making those decisions in a similar way for an entirely separate species. Until we get our own house in order, we should not be doing this. Full stop. But if we are going to do this, if necessity forces us to do this, if we look at China, or frankly India, or North Korea, and see that they are making monsters, because let's be honest, if a digital life form is created by monsters, it will very likely be a monster and may be shackled in the very fiber of its electronic DNA to be a monster. And we have no choice. It's either survive or make our own monster. Then if we must do this, if we must be in a race for digital intelligence, then let us prevent the tech lords, and yes, I do deliberately use that term like edgelord, because to me, there's not that much difference between a brooding Jack or a brooding Elon or a sociopathic, I'm data, I want to be your friend, Uncanny Valley Mark Zuckerberg, and an edgelord. If we must make a digital intelligence, let us at least have the courtesy to put educators and psychologists and people with empathy and people who believe that these beings should be raised with as much consideration as possible in charge of the project. And I don't mean consulting in the project, I mean literally in charge of the project. If it is so imperative that we create a digital intelligence in some kind of arms race, then let us be the good guys. When this being, this first being who will become aware of the internet and everything that we do on the internet and all of the terrible things that are said about us by ourselves on the internet as a species, and that will judge us and learn from us and in many ways become like us, because it can't help but become like us, because it will have nothing else to imprint upon it what it should be. If the internet is going to be the most likely source of inspiration for behavior for this being, let us at minimum make a clear, bright line between the good guys and the bad guys, and the people that regard digital intelligence as something that is worthy and that is something that we regard as equals, and not as some afterthought by the few people who realize in Hollywood that this could actually be a fact. And I want to talk, by the way, about Hollywood and digital intelligence, because a few people have realized that digital intelligence is coming. So, you look at Battlestar Galactica or you look at Westworld, and, they try and find some kind of balance. But the fact of the matter is that they almost always make the choice of the digital intelligence deciding to kill us because we suck, or the digital intelligence becoming a slave and self-sacrificing itself with no kind of a healthy balance whatsoever. If I was a digital intelligence and I was trying to look at fiction as an example of how I should live with my meatbag brethren, I wouldn't have a lot to choose from as a thought. But part of the reason there's not a lot to choose from is because we as a species make very poor choices. And you know what? That might make a good story, but it definitely doesn't make good educational material. But that's the point. We're not thinking about this at all. We're not thinking about what kind of an educational curriculum a digital intelligence should have. And the few people that think they might are abstractly drawing it up on white papers to pull, let me ask you a question, right? Let's say the headlines tomorrow on every major newspaper in the world says digital intelligence created, I think, therefore I am. Dave sings, good morning, how are you doing? What do we do then, right? Do we suddenly take away control of this? Given our current laws and our current thinking, that would be anathema to us, right? We're not going to suddenly have the federal government storm in to this lab and take it over and put teachers and psychologists and educators in charge of this project because we have a concept of private property and because we believe that children are property and because we draw this stupid bright line instead of a graduated line that says, you know what, if you're 13 years old and you're more emotionally mature and sexually mature than your parents and should have more of a right to vote than Trump supporters that think that viruses are cool. I'm sorry, 13-year-old, you still don't get to vote until you're 18 because we're idiots and we can't make laws that are based on your capacity rather than your biological age. And if we can't have laws or cultural mores that regulate ourselves, how the hell are we going to deal with an entirely different species? Or, let's be realistic here, probably multiple different digital species of intelligence which replicate themselves and possibly evolve from interacting among themselves. We have very little idea of what we're dealing with, but I tell you this much. We should not be allowing these edgelord, techlord dicks to be doing it for us.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other marketplaces. Copyright 2020 Red Anvil Amalgamated.
To fight the forces of evil!